Hi, it's Paul Antonelli here. Welcome to another episode of the Ideal Business Podcast. The subject that I'm going to talk about today is windows of opportunity and how not to miss them and how to see them. I think one of the things that I've realised, and the reason I've sort of put this together, I was sort of reflecting on a lot of the things that have taken place, in the last 5 or 10 years, and a lot of times it was being able to see an opportunity that worked and made sense for us, and that opportunity isn't there forever. It sort of comes and then potentially it closes and moves on. I'm not just talking about investment opportunities, for example, when buying this. I'm talking about other sorts of opportunities that might be based on external factors or other things that are taking place in your business or in your life that you go, well, this would be a really good thing to do and really makes sense. And so it's really important to have a bit of a philosophy and being able to move when these windows present themselves, as long as they fit. I guess the most important thing is that they fit really clearly. One of the things that creating an ideal scene and having some structure to what it is that you want to achieve is that it's a really great tool for knowing what to say no to. Because, a lot of entrepreneurs have a bit of a shiny object syndrome where I've got this going on and, someone comes and talks to me about that and that looks fantastic. I'm going to get excited about that. There's something over here and there's something. And you just get spread all over the place. And part of that, being able to not be a victim of that getting dragged all over the place, is to sort of stay quite focused and have a really clear picture of what the ideal scene looks like, not just for your business, but for yourself. And then when these opportunities present themselves, you can actually go, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's really, really going to work for us. I'm going to give you a bit of an example. But it might be useful to sort of share a bit of an example of how this looks. One example is about 8 or 9 months ago, purchased a property not far from our place, a couple of kilometres from our house. It was an acre property, not a big property, but there's a bit of land associated with it, and I want to put a shed up to a bit of a workshop area. And so we identified it, we found it, and that was great. And then just after we'd bought that, there was a neighbour who owned 2 properties adjoining our properties, reached out to us and said, hey, are you interested in buying my properties? Yeah, because he was in a process of wanting to sell them. He was looking at potentially buying the property that we bought, but really came to us and said, do you want to buy these properties? Yeah. And so it's interesting, isn't it? So this is a classic window of opportunity, isn't it? Property you just can't buy, you can, I guess, if you pay enough, but sensibly, you can't just acquire a property. So that was something for us to look at really closely. So there's 2 adjoining properties to our property. It doesn't make sense. Should we buy them? And so we did a bit of, as it presented itself, we looked at it and went, okay, could work, could make sense. We were dealing directly with the owner of those 2 properties. He owned 2 of the properties together. And so there was no one else involved. And so we did a bit of a due diligence process and we looked at some things. And what we didn't know, which he raised with us, is that the property that we bought has got a change of zoning, which means it's going to be able to go from residential to commercial at some time down the track. And we didn't know that. That wasn't an objective for us. And so these 2 additional properties would also fall under the same sort of changes that are taking place. So that was one thing. We actually took some time and went and saw a town planner and had a bit of a discussion with him. Said, kind of how that works. And so we did end up buying these additional properties. And you don't always act on it, but because we're really clear about what we're trying to achieve overall with our investment portfolio, and there was that back end that there's potential for some commercial, going from a residential to commercial, so some upside, then it made sense. It sort of made sense to do that. And so we ended up buying those 2 properties. And you can see what would have happened is, if we weren't really clear, we weren't in a position to act, we would have said, oh, look, we're not really interested. And then they would have been sold. And then it's unlikely that we would have been able to have a go at getting those properties down the track. Or if we did, probably would have been at a premium as prices have risen. So that's an example of a window of opportunity that we sort of took advantage of, and it ended up working quite well in the sense that now we changed our plan and we're a little bit more flexible. And so I think you can find that these things pop up all the time, and there's two sort of extremes to this. One is that you've got a really rigid plan. It doesn't really fit with your plan, and so you're just going to stick with your plan. And so you rarely sort of do anything unless it's highly structured and sort of online. And the other end of it is that there's no structure. Something pops up, you look at it and say, it looks like a great opportunity, and you get involved in things that possibly aren't that great for what you're trying to achieve and where you're trying to go. A bit of balance in those extremes is the key. And then you can sort of identify when these windows cross the table and go, these windows of opportunities present themselves. And then you go, right, this is something I'm going to leap on and get all over. Another window of opportunity, which is something quite different. I often talk to, when you're talking to business owners, they always talk about, well, one of the things that most people are keen on doing when they start a business is spending more time with their family, spending more time with their kids. Yep, it's pretty much universal, unless you hate your kids. Most people don't hate their kids. Most people like their kids or want to spend time with their kids. And so you can sort of appreciate that's another window of opportunity. And the reason it is because typically when we've got all our kids are adults now, but what we found from our experience was that when they're small, they just want to spend time with you. They don't really care about this and that and all the other stuff. They just want to spend time with you. Unfortunately, the way life sort of pans out is when your kids are small, it's a really busy time of life. There's this thing going on, there's that, and then drop off, and you're working career-wise, da-da-da-da-da-da. And in business, it tends to be the same. You might be sort of growing or starting a business. And so what happens is, when I've talked to business, they said, look, when I get this and this and this sorted, then I'll be able to spend more time with my kids, I think there's a window. It's just my opinion on that, but I think there's a window up to the age of about 12 or 13 where you can really strengthen and create a really good bond with your kids. And they're still sort of able to engage with you and react with you and all those sorts of things. And you can build a value set. After they become 13, maybe 14, they sort of start moving away from you as a child. They're not quite adults, but they're sort of into that young adult sort of phase. And the ability, the amount of time they want to spend with you and engage with you will be directly proportional to the amount of time and effort you put into them, which makes sense. So I think that's another example of a window of opportunity that we can sort it out down the end. By the time I'll do this and I'll do this in the next 10 years, then the kids are 17, 18, 19, and they're off, It's that whole Cats in the Cradle song. If you've never heard that song, Cats in the Cradle song, which sort of talks about the son always wants to hang out with the father's busy, and then the father wants to hang out with the son, and now the son's busy. It's just ended up the way it started. So windows of opportunity are important to consider and think about things in your business, in your life, that present themselves or may be present now, but actually once they pass may not have that opportunity again. And so it's really important. It's a really good way to just look at things a little bit differently, and understand that. I get approached quite a bit. Here's a business to look at. What do you think about this? Do you want to invest in this business? So I always look at it, because I'm really open to sort of engagement and seeing how things could fit into things. But because we've got a really clear ideal scene, and we know where we're going to head with stuff, it's a really easy exercise for us to go, no, that doesn't really fit, doesn't really work with what we're doing. And so we can sort of identify that very quickly. If we didn't have that, then we'd just be assessing it for itself, like whether it's a business or an investment, instead of how it fits into the overall picture. They're both important, but it's probably very, very critical as well to make sure that it does fit in the overall picture. So windows of opportunity, it's great to have a radar up for it and to know when things might present themselves. Another example of a window of opportunity that presented itself, and it's just sort of thinking outside the box. I had someone approach me who's been listening to the podcast and has built a good business up, and he was looking at potentially franchising the business. And so we had a bit of a discussion. In some of those discussions, it worked out that potentially franchising the business wasn't going to take him personally where he wanted to head. It could have done. And so I identified a bit of an opportunity where we could work together in a role in a particular way, with one of my businesses that might fit what he wants to achieve better. So that was an example where I said, well, look, here's an opportunity. So understanding what it was that he wanted to do and what I had on the table, then there was an opportunity that presented itself. Whether it goes anywhere, I'm not sure, but it was identifying it and seeing how it could unfold. So that's another way to look at those sorts of things. I really like keeping a little bit of openness and being receptive to things as they present themselves, because it does enable you to be a little bit more flexible how things sort of take place. And these windows, and a lot of stuff that we do, you hear about it. Timing is everything. Timing's a big part of it. Timing's a really big part of it. One of the other windows of opportunity in another aspect is, for example, I've got a bit of a philosophy of, and I've talked about this before, is, the best time to get money, particularly from banks, is when you don't need it. When you don't need money. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's actually very sensible, because when you actually need the money, it might not stack up for the bank to lend you money. But the best time to get access to resources and get access to facilities and then get access to overdrafts is when you don't need it. So that's another window of opportunity. If you look, and an example would be, we did that recently, went to the bank. The last few years have been really good. So I've gone back to the bank and said, okay, we want this facility, that facility, and I sort of outlined how it would work and what I was prepared to do. Pretty much they came back and agreed to it all. Why? Bottom line is we don't really need the money. We're going to utilize that money for some processes, but it's a lot of it's about getting access to the money when you don't need it. And that's when, for example, banks are really happy to lend it to you. And so that was another window of opportunity. I said, well, this is a bit of right now, everything's looking pretty good. The business is ticking along nicely. It's still, there's no reason why it should change, but that could change. And then that opportunity to do that may no longer exist, if that makes sense. And so I took advantage of that opportunity, and I thought, now's the right time to do this. So yeah, I think there's a few things to consider, and it's great. I do like having a plan, having an objective, and knowing where you're going. But as you probably would agree, that in life and in business, often the way that you get there changes, and it's sort of going with the flow a little bit, and sort of seeing these things that come across your table and going, this could actually work really well. This could be a really good thing to help us get to where we're going faster or suit better what we're trying to achieve. So that's something that I just wanted to touch base on. It's sort of creating a bit of a windows of opportunity radar, and not sort of accepting or believing that you can always go back and do that. There are some things, like when you look at investment opportunities, there's tons, there's always a great investment opportunity, but there might be some specific things that present themselves that, come, and if you choose not to take advantage of it, move on, and then that window's closed. Yeah. And so that's important to sort of identify, sort of separate those out. When you look at some opportunity, you go, well, yeah, that could happen next week, next month, 3 months, next year. That specific opportunity, which relates to something specific or things that will unlikely to line up again, that's something that you look more closely at, not missing those. And that's what timing's all about. I think timing's got a lot to do with that. Just something popped up the other day. We've got some property in South Australia, another state, and there's an adjoining property next to our property that caught on fire. And it didn't damage our property, but pretty much destroyed the property next door. And there's an opportunity to buy that property now. So we're looking at it and saying, well, if we don't buy it and someone else buys it, then that's going to pass on. So there's potentially an opportunity for us to buy a property below market level, potentially, and then reconfigure what it is that we do, because there's a bit of subdivision or development activity that we can go through. So it's just another example when these things present themselves. With my wife, we sort of have seen these things pop up, and we can make decisions fairly quickly as long as it fits in with what we're doing. And we're always trying to position ourselves so we can take advantage of these things that pop up, So that's a little bit about windows of opportunity and creating a bit of I guess it's a way of looking at things to see, where does this opportunity fit? Is it a window that's going to close and you go, oh, that's gone? Or is it something that can pop up again and again and again? And, does it really work for you and what you're trying to achieve? Thanks for joining me in this Ideal Business podcast, and I'll catch up with you in the next podcast. Ciao for now.